Aaron Rodgers is officially a Pittsburgh Steeler, but did the Steelers make a mistake? And should they have kept Russell Wilson? I don't think so. We'll discuss on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso. With the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready, Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome in to the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the madman, Tyler Rowland, joined today by Locked On NFL expert, the legacy, Louis DiBiase. On today's show, we're going to take a look at veteran quarterbacks who are starting in a new place. We'll talk about Daniel Jones against Justin Fields, Geno Smith against Sam Darnold, but we'll start with the Pittsburgh Steelers dilemma, Aaron Rodgers against Russell Wilson. Before we dive into it, though, I do want to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen and for being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. But again, Aaron Rodgers finally with the Steelers. It's finally happened. He goes to mandatory minicamp last week. Feels like we waited on it forever after the draft completed. So, it's official, yes, but it is kind of crazy that it's actually here. But now the question becomes, what should our expectations for Aaron Rodgers be? What should our expectations for the Steelers be? And Louis, I'm on record. I think the Steelers do have a chance to be a true contender here. I think they would obviously not be a favorite, but I think they're a couple bounces away from winning an AFC championship game with some defense and Aaron Rodgers making a throw to DK Metcalf. I just don't think they're as far off as maybe some other people think. So my expectations for the Steelers, and maybe I'm just setting myself up for disappointment here, is they should be a playoff team with a team that I think has a serious chance to win the playoffs. That would be my expectation now.
Yeah, for me, I think the expectations are pretty much the same as they've always been in years past, because I don't think Aaron Rodgers is a
I see a change.
Upgrade.
That's the thing. I do see a change in expectations.
And that's where we differ. And we're going to talk about Russell Wilson against Aaron Rodgers. I don't feel like there's much of an upgrade. Some might say Rodgers is a little bit of a better player right now than Russell Wilson. I would actually argue in the opposite direction. So I don't think the Steelers got good enough at quarterback for me to say now suddenly they're a team that can make it to like the Final Four of the NFL. I still think they're going to compete for a wild card spot in a wide open AFC, but I don't think Rodgers puts them over the top from what originally was an 8 to 10 win team to now suddenly, 11 to 13 wins, and they're competing for a Super Bowl. But I just feel like they kind of made a lateral move when it comes to going from Russell Wilson and Justin Fields to Aaron Rodgers. So that's why my expectations have pretty much stayed exactly the same.
And see, that's interesting because I think if you would ask the Pittsburgh Steelers, they would, disagree with that. They would feel like they did make an improvement at quarterback. And I think that's an interesting conversation because Russell Wilson did have his moments last year during the season. The Steelers got real hot in the middle of the year. And you wonder how Aaron Rodgers would fit, because where I would say I think Aaron Rodgers is a better player than Russell Wilson right now. I've always said, Aaron Rodgers has always been better than Russell Wilson, so why would it be different now? But one thing I will concede is I think Russell Wilson, although he's not as mobile as he once was, his mobility is better right now than Aaron Rodgers in an Arthur Smith's offense. How will that fit? And that's something that our guys over at Locked On Steelers talked about this week.
Arthur Smith kind of opened up a little bit about the Steelers offense, saying look, I'm not going to run the wishbone with Aaron Rodgers and DK Metcalf added into it. What's your sense of how different this offense can actually look this year just with the addition of those two guys?
Yeah, I asked him the question about that because I said, look, you guys ran the ball fourth most last year. Aaron Rodgers attempted the second most passes in the NFL. So how do you marry together really a run-heavy offensive coordinator with a pass-happy quarterback? And, he kind of gave – I think he loves to give us these little one-liners. He is pretty funny. And so he's trying to make a point by saying I'm not going to run the wishbone. But I think really what you're going to see is an offense that builds off of the running game. And I think the running game is definitely going to still be a big part of what the Steelers do, but then integrating that play pass and opening up opportunities to throw based on running the football. So if I were to guess like a percentage, I think this might end up being a pretty balanced offense. And it could change week to week, but I think the balance is really what they're striving for.
Now, see, I got to play counter to myself. I have to at least admit, that is something I'm a little bit worried about. Does Aaron Rodgers want to be a heavy play action guy? Rodgers is a guy who thinks I have everything figured out. The more I have my back to the defense, the more we're hurting our offensive chances. You know what I mean? I'm sure that's how he's thinking. So I guess if you think it's a lateral move in terms of the level of play, the quality of play, and I think we both agree that Russell Wilson would be more mobile, and if Arthur Smith wants to do that bootleg action that he's done a ton his entire career, would you argue that they would have been better prioritizing keeping Russell Wilson in the building rather than kind of just saying, we don't care if he leaves, we're focused on Rodgers?
Yes, and for the record, I'm not very passionate about either one of these quarterbacks. I would have went with Plan C and went in a completely different
direction.
Kept
Justin Fields, or
I would
got
have
a
kept
rookie?
Justin Fields between the three, or I would have drafted somebody early on in the 2025 NFL draft. So I'm not passionate about defending Russell Wilson over Aaron Rodgers, but I do think in a vacuum, if it's just those two options, I think for the Steelers, Russell Wilson fits the offense better. And while Aaron Rodgers is going to be a more consistent pocket passer that I think is going to complete more balls, he's going to make different types of throws over the middle of the field. Like, he's just a more advanced quarterback, I think, from that kind of standpoint than Russell Wilson. But Russell Wilson's going to give you the explosiveness with, downfield plays. I think he fits well with DK Metcalf, like he did last year with George Pickens. I do think he's more mobile, and he'll be able to create a little bit more for an offense that, outside of DK Metcalf, has very little to no weapons. The guys at Locked On Steelers were talking about how they're going to run through this run game, but I don't even really love their running backs either. Warren and Gainwell doesn't really move the needle for me. So if that's the face of your offense, that's a problem. So I just think mobility would be very important in Pittsburgh's offense because you're going to probably need to create outside of structure. And Rodgers, maybe this next year, everyone keeps saying, well, he's 40. Maybe it takes 2 years to fully recover from this Achilles. But if you get the Rodgers from last year, who was a solid player, but could not move, I don't know how the ceiling's going to be much higher in Pittsburgh this year than last year. In fact, I might think it's a little bit lower.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair argument.
Higher, right? I'd like the floor might be higher, but I think the ceiling is lower.
And I think that the one thing that I would really hone on, just to be fair, is that I'm more worried about Arthur Smith than Aaron Rodgers. I think there are coaches out there that could probably get the best out of Aaron Rodgers at this age with the lack of mobility. I don't know that that's Arthur Smith. I don't know that Arthur Smith is the guy that's going to be. And you mentioned the running backs, and I agree with your setbacks. Now, listen, the rookie Caleb Johnson out of Iowa, okay, he's going to be good in a zone system. But again, he's going to be good in a zone system, and that zone system that Arthur Smith runs with the outside zone and the play action bootleg off of that. So that if you're drafting a guy who's really good in a zone system to be kind of your bell cow back, because Jaylen Warren can't be that. He's a change of pace back and a satellite back. Well, then that tells me that you are going to stick with your play action outside zone bootleg system. And now I'm like, is that the best thing for Aaron Rodgers? So my concerns about Arthur Smith may ultimately be the thing. But the quick question for me is, to you, do you have more faith in the New York Giants, even though they're probably a worse team? But, they have Malik Neighbors. Andrew Thomas is one of the better left tackles. Brian Daboll isn't a terrible coach. He got a playoff win on the road with Daniel Jones. He's not awful. Do you think that there's a chance that the Giants get more wins this year than the Steelers?
I could totally see it. I think they're on a similar tier. The New York Giants defense, that front seven with Abdul Carter, Kayvon Thibodeau, Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, that's a legitimate defense that could, a couple years ago, this team won a playoff game. I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Giants bounce back. If Russell Wilson takes care of the football, he doesn't turn it over, they kind of lean on the run game as well and give Malik Neighbors the ball a lot. I don't think the New York Giants are in a great situation either. I'm not saying they're going to make the playoffs. I think eventually they're going to want to turn to Jackson Dart at some point this year. So I'm not saying New York's making the playoffs, but I think they're on a similar tier. I think Pittsburgh right now will probably over-under-wise from a win perspective is going to be favored to be the better football team, but I think it's a similar tier team in a similar situation. That's why, I don't know, Pittsburgh I think they're not really living in reality right now with where they are as a football team, and they operate as if they're still this 2010 team that's competing for Super Bowls.
Well, when you have 7 championships, 6 championships, I guess you get to operate with your head in the clouds a little bit.
They're getting into Dallas Cowboys territory where they're just living off the. Dallas is putting up a new documentary about their Super Bowls from 1,000 years ago. Pittsburgh's getting into that territory a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of NFL watchers nowadays weren't even born the last time that the Cowboys won a Super Bowl. But
the VHS
either
was
way,
the main playback system when they won their last Super Bowl.
that's pretty insane. Aging ourselves, certainly.
Yeah.
But the one thing I will say here is one thing that makes it tough on both these teams is they have tough divisions. Like, these are like the NFC East, especially if the Cowboys bounce back and Dak stays healthy. And then with what we already know about the AFC North, like, it's always tough there. Just tough. And speaking of tough divisions, we're going to go out to the West Coast because Geno Smith and Sam Darnold, they have some tough divisions of their own. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like the NBA playoffs, the intensity, the buzzer beaters, the fans losing their minds. It's the kind of atmosphere that you must experience live. And this year's matchup is already delivering. If you want in, Game Time makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest playoff games. Prices on the app actually drop closer to tip-off, and with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Game Time is a total game changer. I've personally bought all kinds of tickets on Game Time. I bought football, basketball, WNBA and NBA, baseball, comedy, concerts, and I was just on the app, and they have zone deals that were offering 10% off exclusive zone deals for FIFA Club World Cup matchups right around the corner, plus NFL tickets. Here, right now, games right around the corner. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, Louis, let's continue today's edition of Locked On NFL. We talked about Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, that decision that the Pittsburgh Steelers made. But now I want to move to the West Coast of the country where we have two veteran quarterbacks in new spots who are also, coincidentally, in tough divisions. Now, before we get into it, thanks again for making Locked On NFL your first listen each and every day. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. But Sam Darnold goes to the Seattle Seahawks, and they literally move Geno Smith out, move DK Metcalf out. They move Sam Darnold in. They move Cooper Kupp in. It's kind of like a one-for-one switch. They get some extra draft picks, which clearly going down in quality. They should probably get something else in return, but they have made an interesting bet, and I guess it should be no shock to anyone that offense is coming along a little slowly in mandatory minicamp, and our guys over at Locked On Seahawks talked about that.
As far as what I've learned that maybe isn't as on the good side, and some are going to anticipate this not being good, but I think it was to be expected. It was anticipated this is how things are going to be. The offense, I know, is a long way away from leveling it up with this defense. I just mentioned all the continuity and the coaching staff being back. The offense has the exact opposite. You're breaking in a new starting quarterback. You've got a bunch of new receivers that have never played with this quarterback before. You've still got offensive line questions that remain unanswered. What's going to happen at tight end, running back? Can you get the run game going? We did not see this offense put many points on the board during OTAs and minicamp. At least the first team offense did not score a lot of points, and that's going to leave a lot of fans concerned. I don't even think this is a concerning development necessarily. I'm just saying here in mid-June that I know this offense is a long way away from being where Mike McDonald's defense is at. Can they catch up by the time we get into training camp and preseason games? Absolutely. They can at least approach that. But it is year one in this system. You get a lot of different pieces. So that is something that I'm not even saying I think. I know that this offense, and Mike McDonald even hinted at, this offense, they're behind the eight ball a little bit right now, but there's time to get this figured out when camp starts.
Listen, I wouldn't say that Corbin was being overly optimistic there, but I think obviously it's an optimistic take to say that the Seahawks can ever get close to battle with the defense that I think is going to be solid, and their head coach is obviously a defensive guru, so that's what you expect. But again, I think they downgraded the talent level at both of those spots that we talked about with Sam Darnold from Geno Smith and DK Metcalf to Cooper Kupp. There's still questions on the offensive line. I don't know that Clint Kubiak I liked what he did early with New Orleans last year, but it fell off pretty quickly. He didn't have a lot to work with by the end of the year either, but there's still questions there. I don't know if this offense will ever get close enough to being good enough to compete with that defense.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think Seattle's ceiling is higher than like with Geno Smith. If he was still the quarterback. I think Geno Smith is the better player right now, but long term, I mean, he's 34 years old. I mean, you weren't signing him to an extension. He wasn't propelling you into Super Bowl contender status. So I overall like the move of going with Sam Darnold, but you're right. They downgraded a lot of this roster on offense, and I really like their defense, but Darnold was a player that I think last year really bounced back because of the strong support system that he had in Minnesota. And Seattle, they're not barren of talent. The Cooper Kupp and JSN is a solid 1-2 punch.
JSN is good.
Yeah.
And the running backs are good too.
Yeah, and if Walker can stay healthy and Charbonnet, that's a solid 1-2 punch. But Sam Darnold, his problem in the past has been when the offensive line cannot protect him. And Seattle's offensive line still concerns me, and he doesn't have Kevin O'Connell anymore. So, yeah, I don't know. I love Seattle's defense, and sometimes I talk myself into the Seahawks competing for the playoffs. But the offense, the floor is definitely a lot lower than it was with Geno.
Yeah, and the Seahawks are a team that I personally, there's going to be teams every year that take step back and move forward. Yeah. And, I think the Seahawks, they went, 10-7, if I remember correctly, to miss out on the playoffs. But I think they're going to take a major step back. I think this is like a 5-6 win team. I think we could be talking about a top 10 pick for Seattle next year, which I think based on what they've done this offseason, I don't know if they would be upset about. They don't seem like a team. You don't do what they did if you're like, hey, we're still competing. At minimum, you're telling yourself, hey, this is a lateral move with more flexibility in the future by not committing 3-4 years of money to DK Metcalf and Geno Smith. Their move was clearly, hey, we want to remain competitive while not committing that money financially into the field. Sam Darnold's deal is 1 year, $33 million. Obviously, Cooper Kupp is not, they didn't give him a ton of guaranteed money into the future. So they're like, we don't really want to do that, but we want to stay where we're at. I don't know if they're going to stay where they're at, and I'm going to say something maybe crazy. I think that Geno Smith's new team, the Las Vegas Raiders, I think they win as many or more games than the Seattle Seahawks next year.
I don't think that's crazy. And I think with Ashton Genty in that backfield, I think the Raiders might be a safer bet. But I will say, though, I do like the Seahawks approach. We were talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers and how they refused to change things. They probably would have extended Geno Smith if they were the Seattle Seahawks, right? Correct. I do think Seattle was realistic and self-aware and made the right call. And it's kind of the best of both worlds. If Sam Darnold's the guy who was in Minnesota, perfect. You found a younger version of Geno Smith that you will be willing to extend. And if not, let's see what Jalen Milroe has. And if he's just awful, then we reset and, we have a top pick in the quarterback market. So the Seahawks, like you said, they didn't hit the full rebuild button, but they kind of retooled a little bit where they're competitive. They have a quarterback. They have a couple options, and then they just kind of see how it plays out. But I don't hate your take at all that the Raiders might be better. I think I like their roster overall a little bit better. And with Pete Carroll, he always elevates. I think there's a lot of Pete Carroll teams that normally their record is better than sometimes it should be.
Yeah, I like the quarterback better with the Raiders. I like the offensive line better with the Raiders. Ashton Genty, I like the running backs. Yeah,
Bowers and Genty is better than anything Seattle has.
Yeah, I would go with that. The wide receivers are bad with Jacoby Myers out there. That is, it's despicably bad if we're honest about it. But at the end of the day, I think you're right about Jalen Milroe. And it's crazy. We had Corbin, one of his clips on from last week when we were talking about the rookie quarterbacks and how they did during mandatory minicamp. And Milroe was a guy who he was given rave reviews to, saying he saw growth every day and really impressive guy, works really hard, and talk about the background. So I think Seattle again, I think the plan is clear. They wanted to remain as competitive as they were while not giving that sort of commitment long-term to older players. DK Metcalf is 27, but is he on the timeline of their timeline? So this way it gives them more flexibility. But with the Raiders, I do think that they could find a way to be more competitive this year, and maybe a team like the Chargers or a team like the Broncos or a team like the Chiefs takes a step back and wins, and that division's more jumbled up, like whoever wins it has 11 wins, and then there's 2 9-win teams, and then the Raiders win 6 games, and the Seahawks only win 5 because Arizona, I could see Seattle being the worst team in their division if San Francisco makes a clear step forward that everyone's expecting, a bounce back. The Rams are one of the better top 10 teams in the league, I would say, and I trust their quarterback and coach. And then Arizona looked like a team last year that was an all-season away from being a playoff contender. So I could easily see things kind of switching up that way.
And the whole conference, I think in the NFC, when it comes to wild card contenders, there's more teams on a similar tier in the NFC than the AFC. I think the AFC is a little more wide open when you get past the top 4 with all the star quarterbacks, right?
Top heavy.
And I think the Raiders, there's a lot of teams in the AFC this year. If you told me they were kind of pesky and competing for that 7 seed, I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not predicting. Again, like you said, the receiving core is egregious in Vegas, and they have a lot of work to be done on the back end of their defense too, still long term. But I don't think it's crazy to say they might be more competitive than the Seahawks. The Seahawks have a very high variance. If you told me they won 10 games this year, I probably wouldn't be surprised. But if you told me they won 2 or 3, that wouldn't really shock me either.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And hey, look, it sounds crazy right now, but every year the NFL is awesome because things change so much. We get worse to first and first to worst, and teams make sudden changes. Look at the Washington Commanders. Yep. Nobody would have possibly guessed that. The Denver Broncos weren't a team that people had making the kind of push that they made during the season. So, hey, that's the fun of it right there, and we could absolutely see that happening. But 2 more quarterbacks that are probably the worst quarterbacks that we've talked about so far, looking to revive their career, and franchises that are looking to revive things right now as well. All right, Louis, let's cap off today's edition of Locked On NFL. We've talked about Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson. We've talked about Geno Smith versus Sam Darnold and those kind of pivot points in the offseason for multiple teams involved there. But now we got to talk about some of the fallout that happened because of what happened with those 4 quarterbacks, and 2 quarterbacks that are really looking to get their career back on track, and Justin Fields and Daniel Jones. And we have Justin Fields going to the New York Jets. I think that was kind of a savvy play by the Jets because you either get one of these guys who kind of drives you to mediocrity. At least with Justin Fields, you have the chance to bottom out, quite honestly, if that's where it takes you. And the fan base seems to really accept where it's at. But there are some in the fan base that think that Justin Fields could potentially be a long-term answer. And my guy John from Locked On Jets, he's just a little skeptical of that, as am I.
Can Justin Fields be the long-term quarterback for the Jets? Well, of course. But I think if you look at Justin Fields' career trajectory, what you have to do is compare it to other players with a similar trajectory, or at least the trajectory the Jets want. And, whenever a young player doesn't produce, there are always a lot of excuses made. They say, well, he's only a couple years into his career. There's still time to turn it around. Look at this guy who had a big improvement over the course of his career. But the reality is, most players don't have massive improvements. For Justin Fields to be the long-term solution at quarterback for the New York Jets, and when by long-term, I mean be here for the next 10 years, be a legitimate franchise quarterback, be like a top 10 type quarterback, for that to happen, he'd have to have an enormous improvement. Whereas for him to be like a medium-term quarterback, a guy who's just kind of hold the fort, he still needs to improve. I think that it's plausible he could improve to the point where he could be, a bridge type quarterback, the guy that could get the Jets to their next franchise guy. And I think that that's critical. I don't think the Jets signed Justin Fields with the idea he's going to be here 10 years. I think the Jets signed Justin Fields with the idea that this is a guy with tools we think we can develop. This is a guy we think we can get more out of than maybe the Chicago Bears did.
That is the perfect answer, in my opinion. That's exactly how I feel about the situation. The Jets have done a smart thing. If Justin Fields hits, then you may have found something. But the more likely answer is that the Jets have a middling season. They're in the lottery range of the top 14 picks, and they can find a way to get another quarterback, and then you keep Justin Fields next year, bring him back for continuity, and then have him battle with a new top 14, top 10, trade up for a quarterback rookie pick. And that's the best way to go forward for the Jets, as while in the background of that, you continue to build the roster in Aaron Glenn's image. That's clearly the best path forward that they can take after years of trying different routes that just don't work.
And I'm curious what building the team in Aaron Glenn's image means. Because if they're trying to build a roster kind of like the Detroit Lions, where they don't have a top 5 quarterback in football, but they have a top 10, top 15, like top half player around a souped up roster, that I think Justin Fields can be that guy. I'm not saying Justin Fields is ever going to be a top 5, top 10 quarterback, but I think he could be on the same tier if he's given a full chance to start in New York as a Jared Goff or a Brock Purdy, or he could be a poor man's Jalen Hurts, where the Jets just really lean into his strengths, the deep ball, the run game, RPO-style offense with Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson. You build that defense, which already has a lot of pieces. I think that can be a formula for the New York Jets to have sustained success. Do I think Justin Fields is ever going to be an elite quarterback? No. He was right. At this point, after year 3, or after the first rookie contract, if you haven't taken that jump, I don't think you're ever going to. Now, Sam Darnold was a rare instance where he did definitely bounce back, but even who Sam Darnold was last year still wasn't like an elite quarterback. So I think Fields can follow in those footsteps on that trajectory. And I think the Jets, I think they're going to sneakily compete for the playoffs this year. I like what the Jets are building, but yeah, I don't think Fields is probably who he is at this point, from a ceiling perspective.
See, and I guess that's, if I just speak my truth, I just don't agree on your assessment of Fields. Like, I just don't think he can be that. I just don't. I don't see that. I don't think that's possible, and that's why I'm not super high on the Jets. I think the Jets can be scrappy, and Fields makes some crazy plays. Like, look at the way he won with the Steelers last year. I think the Jets could have an awesome defense and be a super physical team that shocks some people early. They're going to have a good offensive line if they're healthy, and they might just bully people early in the season and be able to win some games 20-17 and stuff like that. And I think they could be respectable, but I just don't see that from Fields, and I don't know if I see that from the Jets. I guess they do have some pieces. It's just hard to not be super skeptical of the New York Jets as an organization and just kind of feel like they're never going to figure it out. But I don't know. I guess the plan that they have charted out is probably the smartest thing that they can do going forward. But it will be interesting to see how Fields plays this year. He's one of the most interesting players because it's like they're going to give him – it's not like in Pittsburgh last year where it was kind of like, hey, you're really the bullpen. Eventually we're bringing the starter back and you'll have to go back. It's going to be his team. There's nobody else really who's competitive with him right now. So we're going to know by the end of the year, what Justin Fields really can be and what he truly is.
And I just like this approach, whether you feel, Fields can be that guy or not. I'd rather do what, New York is doing, what Seattle's doing, where there's at least some kind of chance. There's still a hope that player can become the guy. Whereas Russell Wilson, that's done. Aaron Rodgers, that's over, right? Those are short-term experiments. Kirk Cousins, if somebody went out and signed him, right? Or traded from Atlanta. So I like this approach better, especially when you're not picking at the top of the draft. I just like the attempt to try to do more and find the long-term piece and not settle. And Justin Fields, I guess eventually you could say you're settling with that kind of player, but there's still a sliver of hope he does take that Darnold step. And I think it's worth kicking the tires on if you're in New York, because the alternative, running it back with Rodgers wasn't going to work. And what else were you going to do? I mean, I don't think drafting Shadur Sanders in the first round is a better option. So I think this was the best case scenario, the best approach.
Yeah. And it makes me wonder, was Daniel Jones the best approach for the Indianapolis Colts? Because he's another guy, our final quarterback, who's in a new place, and the Colts have a decent roster. But my question to you is, Daniel Jones, Indianapolis Colts, Justin Fields, New York Jets, who wins more games this year?
I think it's the Jets. The Jets have, a third-place schedule. I like their roster better. And I think Fields is a better player than Daniel Jones. I know Jones had a playoff win just a couple years ago, but Shane Steichen's a good play caller. I don't think it's going to be enough to elevate Daniel Jones to the level of somebody that's competing seriously for the postseason this year. I like the Jets. And the Colts, because they got to be looking at Anthony Richardson. If he's healthy, we eventually got to give him one more shot, right? Or are they just completely done? They're in such a weird spot, right? I mean, so I don't know what they're doing.
I think they're completely done. And with Anthony Richardson, and he's they're saying he'll probably be ready for training camp or into training camp. He'll be ready during training camp, something like that. I'm sorry, but the time that he lost at mandatory minicamp and then the time that he's going to lose however long it is into training camp, like, I think they're just going to be clear, hey, we're going with Daniel Jones. Like, come back in, get your work.
Was, right, from a development perspective, Anthony Richardson, it's so long to go, and now he's missing all these on-field reps. Yeah, they might just have to take the L on this. It's getting
and with new ownership, who knows how how Jim Irsay's daughters align with, and maybe daughter number 1 likes and daughter 2 doesn't, and things get complicated. I've seen it with the Los Angeles Lakers. When you have a whole family involved, and there's one sibling in charge, but the whole family technically gets to sit at the table and make the decisions like a board or something. And I'm no, high-level expert on the business of how this works, and I don't pay attention to the Colts' inner structure to know exactly this and that and who's in charge and who gets to do what. But anytime you have that family dynamic, there are going to be different people with different alliances and different things, and these coaches and Chris Ballard certainly probably like, hey, we need to win some games, like, so these new owners don't just want to put their new stamp on it and just get a fresh start on things. And I personally see, again, we're at the intersection of Justin Fields' disagreement. I think Daniel Jones is better than Justin Fields. So I would personally take the Indianapolis. I don't think the Colts are going to have a great year, but again, I'm not high on the Jets either. So I'll take Daniel Jones and the Colts to have more wins than the New York Jets. But with that being said, tons of new faces, tons of new places. Can't wait to see how it all plays out in these summer conversations about what can be, what could be. Going to be so much fun here on the Locked On NFL podcast. So with that being said, that is going to do it for us today. I am your host, the Madman, Tyler Rowland, for my co-host, the Legacy, Louis DiBiase. As I tell you every single episode, thanks for tuning in and stay safe out there.